We're pulling out the YM2151 again, but this time for the Sharp X68000.
This is Pixelated Audio, episode 55, featuring Granada.
Welcome to Pixelated Audio, a podcast focused on video game music and retro gaming. I'm James, and this is Brian.
Yo.
And we're going to be your hosts for, the next hour or so.
Yeah, we've got a lot of music today, so only you guys are going to know how long it turns out.
Yeah, and it's very FM synth heavy.
Well, half our shows are FM synth heavy, so, that's not saying a whole lot.
True, FM synth does happen to run in our veins, but today we're going to be exploring the soundtrack of Granada on the Sharp X68000.
I'm excited because this is our first X68000 fully featured episode.
Right.
I have no idea why it took us so long, but I'm glad we're finally here, cracking the whip on ourselves because it's an excellent system. The soundtrack is phenomenal. I think you guys are going to really enjoy it.
Yeah, there's a ton of great music that came out on the system and had arcade perfect ports, tons of original music, like the track that brought us in, which was the opening theme of Granada, composed by Motoi Sakuraba.
I thought that track it sets the show perfectly.
Yeah.
It's such a cool build-up. That first part in the beginning with the bass kind of rolling, it's like two different channels of bass. And one starts out, it's like da-da-da-da-da-da, and then the other one comes in, but it's like offset.
I know, I like that,
so
too.
It's
I noticed that.
Yeah, so it's like almost they're in two different time signatures, and it sounds so awkward and almost uncomfortable, but it almost feels to me like a boulder rolling down a hill, and you just get this really kind of chaotic, progressive moving sound. I like it.
Yeah, and it definitely has that kind of rock feel to the beginning, and the drums are really cool. I love when that kick drum comes in, and then this track, I really liked how it's consistently moving and it's always changing, but that melody is always weaved through, so it doesn't feel like sections of different songs, but you really don't know where it's going to go, and I really like that. It kind of keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, well, this plays during the opening cutscene, so it kind of plays along with that. So if you're watching the cutscene, maybe we'll post a video on YouTube or something, but as you're watching the cutscene, the music changes with actual visuals, so you get this really kind of cool storytelling aspect to the music as well. But all in all, the soundtrack is really awesome, and it's composed by Motoi Sakuraba, and he also had some help with a few other tracks from Masaaki and Yasunori Shiono. The same trio from Arcus 2, The Silent Symphony, which I played a track from in episode 50.
Yeah.
Which was an awesome track.
It was an awesome track. I think I rated that one pretty high on my list.
Anyways, so Granada, it's a top-down tank shooter developed and published by Wolf Team in 1990 for the Sharp X68000. Now, the game was also ported to the Sega Genesis the same year in both North America and Japan, and it's largely the same game in terms of gameplay, but the X68000 version I believe is I think everybody would believe is the far superior version in all aspects, especially the audio department.
Yeah, and even though we're going to focus really heavily on the X68000 version with gameplay and story, etc., all that good stuff applies to the Genesis. So if you haven't played this game and it sparked your interest, there is a more accessible option for you, which is actually how I played through it. But you mostly played the X68000 side, right?
Well, I kind of split it up. I played both. I played through the Sharp version as much as I could, it's a little more difficult.
Right.
So I switched over to the Genesis just to see how it compared. And there is a big difference.
Right.
But the Genesis version was a little bit easier, so I was able to make it quite a bit further in the game. And I thought it was a ton of fun. Both versions, either way you play it. So if you have the Sega Genesis version, you're not really missing out. If you're really into VGM like us, you'd feel a little bit inadequate. But otherwise,
and we're gonna get into some of those differences. But it looks fun all around. I really like the Genesis version as well.
We're also going to talk about some of the sound hardware a bit later on too. It's stuff we've talked about before, I think, a little bit, but there's also some new stuff as well. So I think it should be a lot of fun and also educational.
Yeah. But first, let's get into the developer and publisher a little bit, because Wolf Team is pretty special. We've kind of briefly talked about them on previous episodes, so it's probably a good idea to keep the rundown a little bit short.
Yeah, so I think it's mostly been on expansion packs, right? Yeah, I think we've only kind of just touched on them. So long story short, Wolf Team was a Japanese video game developer and publication studio founded in 1986 as a subsidiary of Telenet Japan. Then in 1987, they broke away and became an independent company for a few years, which apparently didn't work out because they folded back in with Telenet in 1990 and pretty much continued that way. And so in 2003, Namco basically bought them out, or bought majority of the shares from Telenet, and renamed the group Namco Tales Studio Limited.
And most of the titles Wolf Team put out were on the X68000, PC-98, Sega Genesis, and the Sega CD. And some of those titles are Arcus and the Zon series, Valise the Phantasm Soldier, Soul Feast, which is a very well-loved shooter on the Genesis and Sega CD. They did both Dino Land and Final Zone for the Genesis and X68000.
We played a track from Dino Land in our pinball episode.
Yeah, way back on the pinball one.
Oh man, that was so fun.
Yeah, we need a pinball round too, I think.
Yeah.
There's also El Viento on the Genesis, which has an amazing soundtrack. Time Girl, Devastator, Revenge of the Ninja, and Cobra Command, all for the Sega CD. And there were a few that I didn't mention, but it's a really good-sized list for a relatively small company over a few short years.
Yeah.
And all the games are really solid.
Yeah, so Wolf Team was also responsible for Tales of Fantasia, but there was a lot of headbutting between the employees or the development team in Namco, so a lot of the staff left after the release and founded Tri-Ace, except for the lead composer, Motoi Sakuraba, who stuck around for a little while. And since he composed pretty much 95% of Granada, I think we can get into some more music.
Right.
The track is titled Heavy Line, which plays during the first stage.
You just heard Heavy Line, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada on the Sharp X68000.
That's a pretty sweet track.
Yeah, no, I really liked it. I thought it was really rad.
The synth in there is so piercing. It sounds like lasers cutting through like a safe or something,
Yeah.
like a metal box. It's really cool though. Sometimes it's a little bit too much in certain, not specifically this game, this
Right.
soundtrack, but some Genesis music has some just really piercing high synth, and this it kind of teeters on the okay scale.
Yeah.
But I do like it. I think it's pretty intense.
Yeah, it pushes its limits, but it's really good. It's really very synthy, very awesome. I like this. It's very smooth. I like that kind of dangerous feel. I remember when I first turned this game on, I was just like, oh my god, I get to drive a tank to like this music and blow stuff up. So that was really cool. I also noticed that there was these single little like drum hits,
tom-toms,
stuff like that on one side, and it's like in stereo, and I thought it was really cool. Like
I wrote the same thing down because you get this like thunk, dunk, da-dunk, and like left, right. It's so obvious, you know, you can't miss that. It's a pretty cool little aspect I think that they threw in for this. All right, so the story of the game. Do you want to try to fumble your way through it?
So the game is set in the distant future of September 2016.
Just a few months away, man.
Yeah, I guess all hell's going to break loose. So in the game, you play as Leon Toto, a mercenary who has come to Japan after being contacted by a female agent of the Private Enterprises Intelligence Department, or PED for short. She basically hands you a floppy disk with a job request on it. So I guess we're going to be going back to floppy disks later this year.
It's inevitable, man. Better medium.
Yeah. He accepts the job and then travels to a place called Tabora. But while in Tabora, he finds a super mobile weapon. And it's funny because the game manual says that the weapon has been waiting peacefully as if expecting someone to wake it up. So Leon doesn't hesitate and he hops in. And once inside, the navigation computer says, "Hello, Master." And then you take control of Granada.
Hello, Master.
Yeah. I think it's a little less sinister than that.
Well, you know, I try to give it a little drama.
Even though it's a tank, I kind of expect a woman's voice.
Hello, Master.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway, Granada is a hypertech cannon tank, which uses shields and radar to create its defense, while its offensive power comes in the form of some of the most awesome array of weaponry ever assembled on a battlefield, which happens to be a direct quote from the game's manual.
So it must be true.
Yeah.
So again, this game is a tank shooter where you control Granada from a bird's eye view while shooting enemies and weapon stations through a total of 9 different levels. It's kind of like Konami's Jackal, if you've ever played that.
Yeah, but unlike Jackal, you don't have a set path in this game.
Right.
You have more levels that are roaming mazes.
Yeah, and each level has a certain number of targets spread out over the map, and you have to take each one out in order to advance.
And each level is also not a clone of the last one.
Yeah, they're very different. They kind of mix it up. Each one just seems so much environmentally different than the last.
Yeah, I mean, you're greeted with different enemies and different hazards like lava geysers and boulders.
Yeah, so each level feels refreshing. After you beat one level, it's a total change of pace for you.
Yeah, and even though those levels are really big, to make it a little bit easier, you have a radar that helps you find all these different targets. And then once all the targets are destroyed, the radar will show you the location of the boss.
Yeah, so to get into the most awesome array of weaponry ever assembled on the battlefield, man, I love that quote.
Yeah.
Granada has standard bullets.
Yeah.
It has standard bullets, and it also has this powerful blaster weapon.
But you do have to be careful because that blaster weapon packs a really big kick. It can actually push you off of ledges.
Yeah, so like in the, I think it's like the second stage when you're on this massive ship, you're on these really tiny little catwalks. If you try to use your blaster in that area, you're just going to fall off the edge every single time.
And
it's pretty hot.
It would suck to get pushed backwards into like a lava pit too. You also have the ability to strafe by using the lock-on button, which can help you take out different enemies.
Right. So when you're shooting and you're moving forward, the direction that you're facing, whatever direction you're moving, you're always shooting that direction.
Right.
When you hold down this lock-on key, it kind of focuses your tank in one direction, and you can move the D-pad anywhere and that tank around. So it's very, very useful.
Yeah, we ended up using that quite a bit because it's kind of hard to shoot enemies when you're running away from them when you're actually only able to shoot forward. So this allows you to kind of shoot and go into reverse.
Yeah, there's also a few power-ups.
Yeah, so the game has different power-ups that extend your bullet range, give you a scatter shot, missile launcher, explosives, stuff like that, which really helps out.
Yeah, I think that I collected a few of them, but it's one of those things you're playing, there's so much so frantic on the screen it's really hard to see what these different power-ups are actually doing for you. Your bullets never really make it that far because there's so many other enemies right around you.
Yeah, I remember when I was playing, I said it was like fighting ants. They were just kept showing up. They just were everywhere.
Yeah, so given these maze-like levels, new threats and enemies per level, you still have to watch out for the timer. And this is like really critical to how you play the game. It keeps you in this constant rush for your life, I guess, trying to find the balance between being efficient and also being reckless.
So it kind of gives you this question of, should I waste time and hunt for power-ups or just press on?
The way I played was just one target to the next target. I didn't like even power-ups I could see. I was just like, you have that timer ticking down. It gives you a little bit of stress.
Yeah, and it is a maze, so you got to find your way there. But in case this kind of scares you, there is 4 different difficulty modes in this game. There's easy, normal, hard, and the impossibly sounding mania mode.
Yeah, I only played on normal. I would love to try mania. I'm actually really into beating myself down with difficulty, but I just wanted to see how far I could get, so I played it on normal.
Yeah, so in these different modes, they affect the games in different ways, and especially the Genesis and the X68000. So for the Genesis, each of these different modes affects your health and the timer of each level.
So you get like a little more time and you have a bigger health bar?
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing.
Okay.
And then for the 68,000, the difficulty only affects the enemies and the number of power-ups per level. So the timer, there's no way to adjust that, and there's no way to adjust your health. So that's kind of leads to that game being a little bit more punishing, like you mentioned.
Right. So a lot more bullets on the screen, a lot more enemies to collide with, and pretty much, just no power-up. So just have at it, have fun.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's get into our next track. Finally, some more music.
Yeah.
This is from Stage 2, and the track is titled Windy Avenue.
That was Windy Avenue, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada on the Sharp X68000.
Man, what a good title for that. Windy Avenue. This is like playing on a plane.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty windy.
Yeah, like this giant floating aircraft carrier that has all these holes and stuff in it. But it's a very uplifting track. I love like the tempo that's like really kind of fast paced, especially compared to that first track we played that was a little bit more like heavy, menacing. I think it goes well with the level, and it's just very fun. I think I kind of needed that change of pace after that first level.
Right. I think the beginning part too is kind of like a little bit darker, a little bit more explosive. It comes in and it's just really like, I guess, menacing, like you were saying. And then halfway in, it switches over to this very triumphant sounding, kind of this block of just like pure glory. I really like that about this track.
Yeah, it's kind of like, how did the tank get on here? And then it's kind of scary. And you're like, wait a minute, you're killing everything. You're doing it. So I thought it was pretty cool. It was a really neat level, neat track. I loved all the really soft, subtle things that were going on. Like there was some stereo panning and some really like subtle scales and trills kind of going on. And I mean, there was just a really nice use of variety and energy change within the song.
Did you like the bass on that? It's like,
yeah.
I like that. It was really cool. A little gallop in there.
Yeah.
It's pretty off the hook. Yeah. Anyways, let's take a break from the gameplay a bit and talk about the Sharp X68000, because like many of you guys, I didn't grow up with one.
Right.
Actually, unless you were in Japan for the first few years it was sold, you probably didn't have one either.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard or seen one, it's a home computer and it's kind of a gem. created by Sharp as the successor to the X1 that was first introduced in 1987 and sold only in Japan until 1993.
Yeah, in Japan it's known as the X68000, and there were like 30-something models that came out different years, different periods, different configs, and they all slightly vary in hardware. The name comes from the Motorola 68000 CPU, which was in the first models clocked at 10 megahertz. There's also a lot of other features. So there's 1 to 4 megabytes of RAM that you could expand up to 12. There's separate VRAM for text, graphics, and sprites, and there's 16-bit RGB color depth. And most importantly to us on the audio side, it housed a YM2151, that glorious 8-channel FM synth sound chip that we talked about in our last episode for Sunset Riders.
Yeah, I don't know how many times we've had that chip on the show, but it's definitely been a lot.
Definitely had a lot of appearances. Yeah, and it also has a sound chip for ADPCM called the Oki MSM 6258, and it's also used in the PCFX. But this gives it a 4-bit mono channel at 22 kilohertz sample rate, running with software selected 4 to 8 megahertz.
So for layman's like me, what Brian's saying here is the X68000 has 2 chips it uses for audio playback.
Right, so one for FM synth and one for ADPCM. So let's listen to the chip by itself. And, we're not going to do a full breakdown because there's only one channel. So,
right.
But I think it will give you a good idea of what it's doing as far as how it relates to the YM2151 on the soundtrack. So let's listen to, let's turn up the volume here. This is the track we just played from stage 2. And here's with both chips enabled. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to listen to it. It's a pretty sweet little riff there.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to hear like what each chip is doing.
Right. I mean, and you can see too that the Oki chip is really just handling the rhythm section, and so it's not really doing more than that. But it's relevant for this game, and I think it adds a lot to the sound, and make it a little more whole, because the YM2151 by itself doesn't have the same sampling capabilities, right? So it's a little bit more dynamic with both chips combined.
Yeah, and we've seen that before with other little add-on things or little subset parts that really just make the tracks feel very full. An interesting use of channels always can really make for interesting music.
Right, and all of this ran on top of a pretty cool little DOS like operating system called Human 68K that also had a simple GUI, which gave developers and composers a lot of flexibility and ease.
Yeah, I think all this is kind of showing that the X68000 was kind of ahead of its time.
Yeah, in many cases, it had better hardware than a lot of arcade games. I mean, it even trumped the Amiga and the Atari ST as far as compatibility. And a lot of the components were just off-the-shelf computer parts, so it was fairly easy to upgrade certain things. But the problem is that it had a limit. So Sharp wasn't putting out, each new year, technology was increasing and improving. Sharp wasn't putting out enough new upgrades for the system, and that kind of led to its demise around 93. It just couldn't keep up anymore.
Right, but there's definitely a period where nothing could touch it.
Yeah, I mean, hell, I read it was the dev machine for all the Capcom CPS games.
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts. So you can really see that this is an important part of gaming history. I mean, it also had an impressive number of pixel-perfect arcade ports like Final Fight, Strider, Ghosts and Ghouls, and Street Fighter 2. I mean, there were so many exclusive titles, too.
Yeah, even some of the ports on different systems or for different systems, when they made it over to the Sharp X68000, they just looked and sounded so much better.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be hearing more X68000 stuff down the road now that we've dug into the system itself.
And there's really a lot more to the hardware. There's different attachments and peripherals you can buy, but we'll save that for another show, or maybe it's a little more relevant.
Right.
Yeah, but if you want to hear some more really excellent music from the system, I highly urge you to check out episode 24 of Pixel Tunes Radio. It's one of my favorite episodes that they've done, and they just play a lot of really good music from the Sharp X68000. They talk about it, and it's just a fun episode overall.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was a really fun episode. But speaking of good music, let's move on to our next track, which is titled Hopping Express.
That was Hopping Express, which plays during stage 3, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada on the Sharp X68000.
That's another cool little track. It's not as, long or dynamic as some of the ones we played before, but it still kind of has that, higher energy, like not as menacing, kind of upbeat tempo, which I liked.
I thought it was a cool track. There's a part where like a trumpet kind of just whistles in your ear. It just sounds so cool. This whole soundtrack, though, sounds like Electric Light Orchestra to me. Like it could be one of their albums.
Yeah.
It just has that feeling.
Yeah, I liked how it had like a simpler feeling to it, a little simpler display of the melody and all that stuff, not as many instruments. But it does have a part where it kind of takes you in a different direction, which I thought was nice. Great samples, awesome composition, but it just kind of left you a little bit more at ease than some of the other tracks I thought.
Right. There's still a lot going on, too, with the track.
Right.
There's still a lot of little subtleties, and Sakuraba, he's just a brilliant composer. So let's talk about him for a little bit.
So Motoi Sakuraba is a really interesting guy. He's a Japanese composer of anime, television dramas, as well as video games. Plus, he puts out independent progressive rock albums.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah,
Have you heard any of his stuff?
Not any of the independent stuff, but I mean, I've heard some of his other music and throughout other games and stuff.
We've talked about
amazing.
him. We've talked about him on the show several times already. But I listened to some of his stuff on YouTube a few weeks ago, and I thought it's pretty awesome.
I'll have to check it out.
He's got some chops.
Yeah, definitely. So he got his start in music as the composer and keyboard player for the band Deja Vu, which their first album was called Broke in the Future and was released in 1988. And in 1989, he began working as the main composer for Wolf Team.
Yeah, some of his early games are Arcus 2, Arcus 3, Crystal Chaser, Final Zone, Soul Feast, Zangier, Hot Shots Golf.
We both love that game.
Love that game. Shining Force 3, and I love that game. He did Scenarios 1, 2, and 3 for that. Some of his later games are Phantasy Star Nova for the Vita. He did Valhalla Knights 3. There was Mario Golf World Tour for the 3DS,
right?
Which it's a really fun game. I need to go back and play that some more.
It's kind of Hot Shots Golf-like.
Yeah,
it's pretty fun.
It's still Camelot style game, right? And he also did Dark Souls 1 and 2, and then he did the PC Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition, as well as a bunch of other games like the Tales series, Golden Sun, Star Ocean franchise, and the Valkyrie Profile games.
Yeah, I mean, he's been composing for a long time. That's why we kind of wanted to break it up as early games and later games, because he's still doing music for games.
There's a lot more that he's done that's not on this list,
of
obviously,
course.
But he's a master composer. He's just he's got chops. He knows his stuff. So we're going to be hearing a lot more from him in future episodes as well.
Yeah. So right now, let's get into our next track, and it's titled Marching Way for Granada on the Sharp X68000.
That was the Marching Way for Stage 4, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada.
Awesome track. So intense and fast-paced. I loved it.
That bass, man, is so cool.
Yeah.
So punchy. I love it.
Well, it's a very percussion-heavy and bass-heavy track, which I really liked. I mean, there was so much energy. Everything was just going crazy. I mean, there was almost like hardly any seconds without a drum hit, which was really intense. I liked it.
Yeah, I like the organ, that soloist. I'm not sure what instrument that was.
Yeah, it's hard to tell when all these samples. It's like a mixture.
Right. It's just, I don't know. But I really liked it. It was all over the place. It had that really kind of jazzy organ kind of feel to it, and the track. I don't know. This track speaks to me. I like it.
Yeah. No, I could see this as like imagining all these like pixel people at like a rock show or something like that, and there's like, yeah, awesome, and you can see like just them just jamming away. I can really imagine like a drum player, just like his pixel hair flying all over the place.
That's really cool. Now, let's get into our next track, actually. This is from Stage 5. It's called Nature Trail, and it's composed by Motoi Sakuraba, Masaaki Uno, and Yasunori Shiono.
You just took a trip down the Nature Trail, which plays in Stage 5.
Dude, that's so cheesy. Continue, please.
I couldn't help it. It was composed by Motoi Sakuraba, Masaaki Uno, and Yasunori Shiono.
That's a really cool track. I like this one a lot. It has that march to it the whole time. And this plays when it's like a mountain level.
Yeah.
And so it does kind of feel like you're going through this. Well, it doesn't really feel like you're going through a marching, I don't know.
Maybe like a hiking trail or something.
Yeah. You're marching while you hike.
Yeah. To me, it felt like it has almost like a credits or like a end cutscene type feel. Like it feels kind of like heroic, like maybe some of the danger's over and I did it, and they're kind of showing you what happened, because there's not really much story throughout the game. It's kind of like the opening title screen kind of shows you some of the story, and then I'm guessing towards the end there's some stuff. But I thought it was really great. There's a sound in it where the like this crash, and it sounded to me like shopping carts kind of like hitting. I thought it was pretty cool. It was neat, and it just kept going on and on. I was like, oh, this is really pretty cool.
I did like the rhythm section in this too. I thought the aside from just the march aspect of it, the crash, the cymbals, all that was just really clean. It made the track feel a little bit more live.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I had a lot of fun with this track. I thought you got these three guys together composing. Finally, this is the first track we played with all three working on it. And you can really see that they put a lot of attention to different, minor, nuances in the track with different instruments. So the other two guys, we haven't talked about Masaaki Uno and Yasunori Shiono yet. Masaaki Uno is responsible for Soul Feast on the Genesis, Sega CD, and the X68000. He also did El Viento for the Genesis, we talked about earlier, and Arcus Odyssey that came out on a few different platforms. He's also responsible for composing Mario Tennis for the Game Boy Color, Golden Sun, The Lost Age for GBA, and Mario Golf Toadstool Tour for the GameCube.
Yeah, some pretty cool titles. And for Yasunori Shiono, we have Chaos Seed for SNES and Saturn, Lufia and the Fortress of Doom for SNES, Lufia 2, Rise of the Sinistrals for SNES, Lufia, Curse of the Sinistrals for GBA, and Energy Breakers for SNES.
Yeah, these guys have a really impressive track record too for composition, and we see a lot of stuff that they've done with Motoi Sakuraba, like in conjunction. Like they kind of were like a trio, I think, for a lot of games, a lot of Wolf Team stuff. And these guys are just they all are excellent composers, and they all have had different stuff. Like I think Masaaki Uno, we had a track from him in our in episode 50, actually, and we talked about him a little bit more. He had a big role for Wolf Team and did a lot of stuff with them. And also just excellent composer, Yasunori Shiono, has done a lot of other stuff. I think we might not have done a solo track,
I'm not sure,
from him, but yeah, these guys together, they just create this, come together with their powers combined, they create Captain Composer.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Anyways, let's get into our next track. This is called Mountain Path, and this plays during stage 6.
You just heard Mountain Path from Stage 6, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada on the Sharp X68000.
Man, I love this track so much.
Very cool one.
This is like my favorite track.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like a lot of different solos, really awesome groove, kind of jazzy and kind of funky at the same time. Oh, man. Just off the rails.
Yeah, very synthy. I thought that the beginning part and that melody that kind of shows up throughout it had like a very Genesis quality to it, to the synth. It's very kind of crunchy and like strong, like very not very like echoey or anything like that, which I thought was really cool. I love that second half of the track. Like, so like it's less synthy and it's more like mellow or a moody kind of,
almost like a harp, or organ, like a very light organ. Where does that? I mean, that solo at the end there, man, just off the rails.
Yeah,
it's so
super
good.
Cool.
It's so good. Do you want to listen to that just by itself? All right, hold on. Let's backtrack here a little bit. This is the first 2 channels, I think. So let's take a listen. That was beautiful.
Yeah. It's doing a lot of work.
Oh my God.
It's really noticeable in that track too. That's one thing I really liked, was that instrument.
Yeah, it's I think it's like approximating like an organ, electric guitar, or keytar. I don't know.
Yeah, guitar.
Really cool track though. Yeah, but back over to the X68000 hardware for a sec. To demonstrate the extensibility just in the audio department, owners could attach several different MIDI synthesizers to the machine for audio playback, such as the Roland MT32, the CM64, and the SC55. You can also attach like the Yamaha devices like the TG100, and also some later compatible MIDI modules.
Yeah, so a good number of games would actually have both the FM synth version of the music and an enhanced MIDI version.
Yeah, so Granada is one of these examples that had specific instructions for the Roland MT32. And we've had some MIDI on the show before, but we're both more like FM synth kind of guys, so we tend to go with that. However, there's some cases where it sounds really, really clean, really good.
Yeah, the original MT32 had a preset library of 128 synth and 30 rhythm sounds played over 8 channels and 1 rhythm channel.
Yeah, it also features digital reverberation, which gives it this really open, like music hall kind of effect.
Right. Yeah, the MT32 was a big deal at the time, even though it was really pricey. It was the de facto consumer MIDI module for computer gaming and is used in a ton of games on the MSX, PC-98, Atari ST, Amiga, and some IBM PCs.
Yeah, Sierra was a huge investor. I think the first, MT32 game was King's Quest 4 or something like that. It featured a whole soundtrack using the MT32. They were all in on it. They thought they're like, oh my god, this is like the next generation of computer music. So we're gonna put all of our cards on this. But it definitely has too many games to list here. Of course. There's so many. If you check Wikipedia or something on MT32 compatible games, you'll find just hundreds of different titles. Anyways, to opt into MIDI playback in Granada, you have to boot the game while holding down the Toroku key. And what this will do is this switches the driver over from the default FM. So our next track is titled Take a Chance, which plays during stage 7, and this is using the MT32.
You just heard Take a Chance from Stage 7, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada on the X68000 using the MT32 MIDI module.
It really goes to show like how much that reverb can create that great hall effect. Makes it sound really like almost you're sitting in this live, symphonic. You're watching the symphony play or something. It sounds really awesome.
Yeah, that was one of the first things that I noticed was that it has that very much hall sound, like you had said, and that digital reverb is really making a huge difference and making it sound much smoother and kind of realistic and not so much like chiptune sounding like what we've heard before. And it's kind of neat to see, like it adds this layer of kind of heroic feelings, like it's like, wow, real instruments or real-ish instruments are using the music for this game, which is pretty cool.
The delay, I think, or not the delay so much, but the decay for the MIDI module, they trail out. So it creates even more layers on top of the reverb, I think, and it makes it just kind of extend beyond that. And it almost has a little bit of a muddiness to it. but it's still very clear.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to explain that.
Well, yeah, it kind of softens those edges, whereas like what we were hearing before is very hard edge. You'd hear like a drum hit, and you hear it and it's over, whereas like now it's kind of trailing in, so then all the edges of all the notes are kind of softened, and it gives you that very smooth sound to everything. Like you're not getting like those really heavy, hard hits,
right,
like what we were hearing before.
So yeah, you can have like a decay that extends over like 5 seconds, and it still sounds very clean.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's talk about the graphics a little bit. There are some differences between the Sharp X68000 version and the Genesis version, but this game is just super clean.
Yeah.
It looks really good. Either way you play it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful game no matter which way you play it. And like I said, I played the Genesis version while preparing for this episode. Lots of great color. Everything was easy to see what was going on. Nice textures and patterns and stuff like that. So nothing really stood out that it was bad. But then when I saw the X68000 version, I was like, oh, wow, this is like a really good game. And I mean, the Genesis, we all know and love the look of the Genesis. It has great looking games, but the X68000 just like knocked it out of the park. It was just such a beautiful game.
Yeah, a big difference when we were kind of looking is the difference between Stage 2 on the Genesis and then the X68000. The clouds just feel so much like fluffier on the Sharp system.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is the Genesis version looked cool. You could kind of tell you're on something floating above the ground. The clouds were a little more sparse. I don't know if maybe the Genesis couldn't handle like such a full load of clouds.
Right.
But on the Sharp X68000, I mean, you really feel like you're above the clouds. The textures are a lot more subtle, which adds to like a little bit more realism, I think. Whereas on the Genesis, the textures are a lot more apparent, which kind of makes you feel like you're lower to the ground. But I mean, like I said, it's a beautiful game either way you play it. It's just, if you have a chance to check out or even look at a playthrough of the X68000, it's a really beautiful game.
Yeah. Like this would fit perfectly in the arcade. If you had like a joystick, 3 buttons, I could see this working out beautifully.
Yeah. And for me, I don't really have much background with the X68000. I know it didn't come here, but I haven't really played a lot through emulation or really looked up a lot of stuff with the X68000.
It's basically when we're sitting down together. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and now that with doing this podcast, doing a lot more exploring of systems I've never heard of or never got to play. And I was really kind of overwhelmed by the beauty of this. I thought the X68000 would just be kind of an ugly little machine and like make stuff that wasn't really important enough to get out of Japan, but it was a really beautiful system.
Yeah. It's so funny because a long time ago, this is like early 2000s, I remember going into game stores and seeing like X68000 sitting on shelves, and nobody was really, they were going for a few $100s maybe, and I was like, it's kind of heavy,
right.
What am I ever going to do with one? I kick myself now,
of course,
because if you want to buy one, you can't find them at any video game shops in Japan. They're virtually non-existent, and if you want to get one, you have to go to like a Japanese auction, and they're going for like 600 to 1,000, 2,000 for some of the high-end models.
Yeah.
And then imagine shipping it to the U.S. So I think like every time I'm there, I'm like, oh, maybe I can find a cheap one, send it over to my in-laws, and then just take it back with me, truck it back to America.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see that with a lot of these like computer-based systems. Like they're not cheap. Like they may have been cheap at one point, but now they are definitely hundreds of dollars. I mean, we've seen stuff that we've kind of stumbled across that on like Craigslist or something, and somebody's like, I don't really know what I have, and you're like, I want to snag it, and it's gone, like lightning fast. Instantly.
Yeah, but this game is like one of those titles that I think would be a fun one to own. It's like I said, it's really pretty. It has that really cool arcade feel. I like shooters a lot.
Of course.
And even though this is kind of a skew on your classic shooter, like your Gradius, R-Type and stuff like that, it does have a ton of replayability, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the bosses are actually really interesting in this game, too. They're massive.
So we mentioned there's these maze-like levels, which definitely breaks up that shooter-type feel. But what happens is you can run away from the boss, and he will follow you throughout the level. So you can kind of like almost set up like traps for him to where like you're going to make him follow you in a certain direction. You got a good bead on him, which is really neat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really interesting game. If you want to pick up the Genesis version, it's not exactly cheap. I mean, it's definitely not as expensive as the X68000.
What was that, like 50,
it was like $30 to $50 for a game that not a lot of people that I know of have really heard of or played. So it's pretty interesting to see that it goes for that high.
Yeah. Anyways, let's play 2 more tracks. We'll start with Clap, which is the boss music from stage 1 to 4. And this is composed by Motoi Sakuraba. And this is also using the MT32 again for MIDI playback.
You just heard Clap, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada on the Sharp X68000 using the Roland MT32.
This track was really chaotic.
Yeah, very chaotic. It reminded me of like Fantasia or something like that.
I was like thinking Phantom of the Opera meets Sharp X68000. I don't know. This is a cool track though. Like if you really, really listen carefully, you can hear that there's so much actually kind of going on under the chaos. There's a lot of different instruments and little tiny horns and trumpets kind of, squeaking at you here and there. But that chaotic part, man, it's kind of drives on me.
It really works for a boss fight in a different way than a lot of boss music that we've listened to. I mean, a lot of times the boss music in episodes that we've played tends to be kind of like, it's all right, it's cool, it gives you that kind of stress feeling. This feels very dangerous. It reminds me of like a nightmare sequence in like a movie or a play or something like that. It gives you kind of this feeling like you're overwhelmed and things are not going well and they just continue to get worse. And
probably adds with that reverb too.
Yeah, and then those like drum crashes just feel like it's new enemies popping up or stuff like that. I mean, it's really a very intense track that I think just works perfectly for a boss fight.
Yeah, I feel like we were kind of debating, do we want to play the MT32 version or do we want to play the FM version? And we thought, let's kick in another Roland track so you can get a little bit of a better idea of the hardware.
Yeah, and one thing that I did like about this track too is, like we mentioned earlier, that the bosses will follow you around, so it's almost kind of gives you that like horror movie feel, like you're running from Jason or something like that, and you think you're clear, and then he shows up again, and you're like, what? And then you get those drum crashes that make you feel like he's on my tail.
Right.
So, but anyway, let's get into our next track, which takes place in the boss stages 5 through 8, and the track is called Tap.
All right, that was Tap, which is the boss music from stages 5 through 8, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada on the Sharp X68000, and this is using the YM2151 again.
Yeah, so you can definitely tell the difference between the two tracks and the way that they sound. This is back to that very, synthy, like hard-edged sound, which I really liked this track. I thought it was cool.
I'm more of a fan of the FM synth. So
of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, this track I thought was awesome. I thought it was totally cool.
Yeah.
I think that there's so much going on. Man, that rhythm section. Off the hook. Do you want to listen to that by itself?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's just the Oki chip. So hold on, let's play that real quick. So here's the track, and here's just the rhythm section. It's all over the place.
Yeah. It's a very chaotic track, but then you realize it's very precise.
Yeah, I just thought that rhythm section was so cool.
Yeah.
I think the whole soundtrack just has amazing... I mean, Sakuraba, he just has rhythm down. He has it nailed. And you can hear, like, he does some really kind of experimental things with the drums. Pretty awesome. Anyways, let's just keep the ball rolling and move into our next track. This is called Bumpy Road, and it's from stage 8.
You just heard Bumpy Road from Granada on the Sharp X68000.
This is a pretty intense track too. It's got that really cool bass again. And you were saying, like, when we're listening to it, that a lot of songs in the soundtrack have a very similar feel. And I think you're right. I think you nailed it, because they continue the same, I want to say the same kind of atmosphere. You get like the differences when you're playing boss and stuff. That's expected, but I think you're right. A lot of the tracks, a lot of the stages have a very straight kind of view of how it's going to be played out.
Yeah, I mean, you're using a lot of the same samples and stuff like that, and then Sakuraba has, a style that maybe a little bit more of a signature that he wanted to put on this game, which I like. I do like when soundtracks have a cohesive feel. This one has some tempo changes and, adds a little bit or takes away from drama here and there, but overall, I feel like a lot of the tracks are very similar. This one had a little bit of a different feel because it felt a little bit more jerky, like start and stop, until it gets into that more heavy part. Which I liked. It was interesting, but listening to this track on its own, for me, is a little bit hard because of that kind of start and stop kind of feel to it, where the drums and everything kind of work on their own, and they kind of feel a little bit more independent of each other.
Yeah, I definitely say that the some of the first stage music, like stage 1 and 2, were a lot more, I guess, not necessarily enjoyable to listen to, but more of like the style of what I like in FM synth. But let's move over to our next track. What do we got?
The next track is going to be called Smashing Street from Stage 9.
Yes, the final stage, too.
Yeah.
Let's check it out. That was Smashing Street from Stage 9, composed by Motoi Sakuraba for Granada on the Sharp X68000. Pretty awesome, huh?
Yeah, it's another one of those up-tempo, kind of heroic.
A lot of energy. I mean, this whole soundtrack is just a complete adrenaline rush. It's a lot of fun to listen to if you're in the mood for like something that's really chaotic. And when I'm playing the game and I'm listening to the music, it really does pump me up. It gets me in that right mindset.
Oh, yeah, and I definitely think that the drums, the way that they're done in this, throughout the entire soundtrack, really help. Like, even though this one's not as drum and bass heavy as the previous track we just played, like the way that he uses the drums and kind of sets them up is very similar, with like those really hard like single hits, and then he has those like machine gun like hits like all over the place. And that really, even though this track is kind of up tempo and not as hardcore heavy, like it still really boosts you up and gets you really going. And one of the things that I've really loved about this soundtrack is his use of stereo panning. Like, it's the way
kind
that
of when you least expect it, you'll hear something, you're like, oh wow.
Yeah, and the way that I noticed it a lot is that when I listen to this soundtrack, and a lot of soundtracks when I'm at work, is that I have my headphones on, but I leave one ear uncovered because people come in and out of my office, and it's just easier to just be able to hear them without taking my headphones off. So whenever there's that part, I can still kind of hear a little bit in the other ear because it's right behind my ear, so I can tell that there's definitely some stereo panning going on. So it was interesting. And this one, like I said, was just a really cool use of it across most of the tracks.
Yeah, we've already heard like pretty much the entire album at this point, the entire soundtrack at this point. But one thing that you can really hear again in this track too is the scales, and he uses them throughout the entire game. It's almost like traveling through time, like a time machine, like like he'll just use those in random spot. Well, it's not random, but he'll use those in very I guess, good transitional spots. And I really like that about his composition style.
Yeah.
Anyways, as right now, Granada has not appeared outside of the X68000 Sega Genesis at all.
No virtual consoles or remake classics or stuff like that. I mean, it's kind of sad. It's a really fun game.
Yeah, and it has a pretty good little following. I mean, there's a lot of people that love this game, that just adore it, and I think that me and you have fallen to that side as well.
Yeah.
It's an awesome game.
Yeah, it's definitely a game that I'd never heard of, that I definitely have kind of fallen in love with a little bit, and I might be willing to pay that $30 to $50 price range to have a cartridge in my copy.
Just pony up the $1,000 for the Sharp version and just have that sent over.
Maybe once I win the lottery.
Yeah, well, it's never gonna happen. So let's do it together. Let's do a joint effort.
Yeah.
Anyways, so we're gonna move on to our last track. We're actually gonna be looking at the Roland MT32 version again. This is Goodbye, which is the ending theme from Granada, composed by Motoi Sakuraba.
Wow.
Right?
You just heard Goodbye, the ending theme of Granada, composed by Motoi Sakuraba on the Sharp X68000 using the Roland MT32.
It almost has too much reverb. I probably should turn that down a little bit. It's just so it kind of has this like ominous hum throughout the track, but I love that. I think it has that kind of eerie but happy, almost, I don't know. This is like could be a wedding song. Yeah. For your wedding, maybe we'll just play this song.
Well, I had a different feel of like the tone of this song. I got a very heartbreak, like a lot of games with the ending music, it'll be like, oh, you're the best, like you're awesome, 5 gold stars, like you did it. And then this one was just like, it would have made me feel so sad that it was over. Like when it started out, I expected this like 90s R&B singer to come out singing about like heartbreak, like Tony Braxton or something. And
Boys to Men, man. They could have done a voiceover.
And it was just like, oh man, like I felt like so much like emotion in that. And then there's that one part where the drum hits and then it just goes off, and I was just like, wow, like it's kind of like sad, but then it's like telling you, remember, like you fought really hard and you made it. So I was thinking that like if like I ever die, like I want you to like play this. You're like, oh man, this is really sad, but remember, like James worked really hard and like he did stuff in his life.
James did stuff. No, what I liked about this track too is a lot of the music that we've heard so far uses that really crunchy kind of like electric bass, where this track using the Roland kind of substitutes that out for this more kind of soft like stand-up fretless bass, and so the bass line that we're getting is just a lot more smooth. It's a lot more mellow, and I think that's why you're saying it sounds a lot more, I guess, dramatic and sad. Because it has that kind of like droopy, like boo, and it drops down.
Takes a lot of time in between notes, and really kind of like just takes its time in general.
Yeah, but see, for me, I see that as like a very happy thing. Like I feel just, it's almost like this aura around me. Like when I'm listening, it feels just, I don't know, stellar.
Yeah, well, I love like sad music. I'm a sucker for like pain and like heartbreak, I guess.
Yeah, so this was just an awesome track, and I think it was a great way to end out the show. So today we covered Granada on the Sharp X68000. We talked about the Sega Genesis version a little bit, composed by Motoi Sakuraba, with some help on a few tracks by Masaaki Uno and Yasunori Shiono.
If you want to know more about the show, you can always check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for show notes and track lists, and we can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Pixelated Audio.
Really love hearing from you guys, and if you got a few minutes to spare, please leave us a review on iTunes. And we got a few international reviews this time around, right?
Yeah, we have one from Norway, from Ingvild AFJ.
Just sounds like it was mashed on the keyboard there.
Yeah. Thank you for your review. Loved reading your comment. We also have one from Japan, but I can't read it, so Brian's going to have to take over that one.
Yeah, it's Tony Kaku79, and he just had some really nice stuff to say, so I appreciate the feedback. Anytime you guys want to log in and, give us a rating and review, we'll definitely give you a shout out on the show because it's important to us, and it means a lot when we see them come in.
Yeah, we don't ask for money or anything like that to keep the show going, so this is the best way you can kind of boost our spirits and keep us energized to keep making more episodes, because it just shows that you like what we're doing and you want to hear more.
Yeah. Also want to give a shout out to G the Guardian from VGM Rips. He did the rip of the Granada OST, and so shouts to him. If you guys want to listen to really high quality music, VGMrips.net is the place to go. Tons of different packs there. Really high quality. You can rate stuff, add stuff to your collection, download it right there. It's a lot of good music on that website.
More music than you can listen to in several days.
Also, some of our past episodes, if you guys want to listen to them, I mean, I don't know, we have a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, we just did one on Sunset Riders, like we mentioned earlier. Great music.
Right.
We had Jim Power with Chris Hulsbeck on as a guest, which was a very excellent episode. We were just so overwhelmed to have him on the show.
Yeah.
Had a great time. And then if you want to hear some more great FM synth, check out our PC98 Ground Seat episode.
Yeah, that was a blast. I still love going back to that soundtrack. It's so awesome. Anyways, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you in a few weeks for our next episode.